Let's get started. We're
Thought
talking
leaders, when are they coming in?
here. Who are you?
Who are you? What are you doing here?
NG911, barriers to deployment. Everybody here is quite emotional about this topic, as well we should be. We have panelists Barbara Kemp of Assure 911, Mark Fletcher of Avaya, whoever he is, Bill Murtka of, please wave when I call your hand, Bill Murtka of Motorola Solutions, Henning Schultzren of Columbia University, and the Rear Admiral retired David Simpson, who I neglected to point out was with the FCC, apologies. And I'm Carol Davids. We'll be moderating this because Mark demanded that I do that. So, and because I'm so exercised about this. Now, why cannot I make this go full screen?
Forgot Tim.
Here we go.
Barbara.
I forgot who
Mr. Kenyon.
I'm sorry, and I even left you off that. Yeah, somebody has to do it. I have learned how to forward the slides. So the description of this panel was NG911 communications, based on deployed and accepted RTC technologies, has yet to see widespread deployment and adoption. How has this managed to sidestep the normal paradigm shift of technology that we've seen across the rest of the industry, like the pizza delivery man can find you, but the 911 emergency first responder can't? Do barriers exist, and if so, how can they be overcome? And that's what we're going to address. We want to talk about technical challenges, design and operational issues, policy and finance, and customer and enterprise side. So these are the big topics, and what I have here is slides from some of the individuals on the panel that they will want to use as they address the questions. So I'm going to leave these key areas that we want to discuss. And I'm going to start out by asking the panel if they want to chime in on technical challenges. And I haven't asked you to go around the table and give us a 2-minute explanation of who you are, because I think most people have that idea, but if you want to incorporate that into your opening addressing of the problem, I think that would be terrific. How you how you came to know about or be able to talk about this. So technical challenges, and I think that Henning wanted to start out with a discussion of that. Am I right or wrong?
I can speak to that a little bit. So technical challenges, I think in this particular area, are a little different from what we might consider the typical technical challenges, namely that it's just hard as an engineering discipline to do something because we just don't know how to do it. It's hard to do, for example, I don't know, a supersonic flight for passenger flights because of just inherent aerospace limitation. That's not the kind of technical challenge that I think we're facing here. We're facing a technical integration challenge in the sense that we have a widely dispersed, very diverse technical infrastructure where we're operating essentially a system that incorporates probably about, conservatively speaking, 50, probably if you take it broadly, 100 years of communication history all in one system that is decentralized, that is not controlled by any one entity, and that in many cases the technology itself is no longer developed or even supported by industry or other participants in that whole ecosystem. The technical challenge then is that you have, and unlike another system, we basically have, as the old cliche goes, we have to replace the engines while the plane is flying, to stay in the aerospace analogy. And because we cannot simply shut down the 911 system, spend a few months replacing it, and then just turn up the new NG system when we're done. That would make things a lot easier, assuming the coordination problem could be solved and the finance problem that we'll talk about later, but we don't have that. So we're operating in an environment where we're combining legacy databases, modem access to that data, to those databases. We're combining legacy technologies like SMS type of technologies with SIP-based technologies in one system. So that's, I think, one of the key technology challenges that we have. There are others longer term that I think are still technology challenges, and that's that I don't think we have a good solution for at the moment. Namely, that's indoor location, where we are just trying to get our head around the ideas. How do we actually structure end systems as well as network component, the NIAD as one component, in a way to provide reliable indoor location at scale without having to have fire marshals inspect every single building that has more than one floor in the United States.
Anybody else want to address the technical challenges?
Yeah, I believe that the technical challenges stem from a group of users that are public safety focused and know their job very well, but are not necessarily technology educated. And the other group is very technical in nature that are not public safety educated. And I think this disparity gap between the knowledge sets, the right use cases aren't written, so the right solutions aren't developed. And I believe that is what is actually leading to the technology challenge. There's nothing in Next Generation 911, nothing conceivable that you can come up with that has not been developed, deployed, and put forward in the commercial space. Not one thing. So to take one and not use it for the other is a lack of understanding, not a lack of technology.
All right.
You could bridge off of that. I'm working in northern Illinois right now, and it wouldn't matter whether it was in southern or northern. I look at just the building of the infrastructure and recognizing the ESI net and the connectivity. And there's a lot of ways to build a fiber network. But if you don't build it with full diversity and full redundancy, you don't have what you need. And we don't get to the underlying specifications at times when we ask people in the RFP or the RFI. We say, is it diverse? And when people look at the actual network, you have common fiber hubs, you have power that doesn't sustain itself for a long enough period of time, or you have network operations centers in data centers or externally, some other state, some other place, that have unique skills that are available in that center, but they don't see the ecosystem of 911 in that community. And so we don't have all the tools for surveilling and monitoring. So my position is, if we don't build it diversely and build it right and follow the technical specs as best we can, and then monitor it and keep it going, we don't have a system that's sustainable. And I think we're losing the people equation too, because we are short-sightedly having to deal with that budget that Admiral Simpson so aptly described in ways that say, well, then let's consolidate, let's do this. Oftentimes we lose the skill of the right people. Next generation doesn't mean you have to consolidate one person away from where they live. It means technically we can bring the network to where it needs to be diverse, and where the people that have the knowledge can continue to do their jobs.
Okay.
So that's my passion about this.
Great. Let's stay focused on the technical challenges, and let's then go round on some of the very important, I think, design and operational issues that you bring up. One thing I want to pick out of what Barbara just said was the need for a new kind of surveillance, or certainly I think there are still going to be challenges technically to the kind of surveillance that's going to be required on these very heterogeneous. They're heterogeneous vertically and horizontally. There's many new things. So there are areas in which we certainly haven't done the development and the research. And I think Bill wants to address specifically the technical. I want to disagree for a moment, though, with one thing that Mark said, because I don't think we know the indoor location yet. I think we're developing that.
And I can be very brief, right? And hopefully this can be a segue into some of the other areas that you want to discuss, right? I guess I would tend, and this is a great thing to do, right? You want diversity of opinion on a panel. I would tend to agree largely with some of the things Mark said, though I agree, again, there are things like indoor location that we haven't really solved a lot. But if you think about the term technical challenge, Our challenge to get this rolled out is not primarily technical. So many of the key pieces have been tested and vetted in other sectors, right? I think, and this is maybe a plug for sticking around to 5 o'clock to hear what I have to say in my summing up. I think it's valuable, but I'll try to give a little tickler here. And it really goes to the shifting nature of where innovation comes from, and the fact that in a capitalist society, things that don't make money or save money always are chronically underinvested, right? Again, it's an academic conference, so I can probably get away with this reference here in a way I can't many times. Anybody who knows or has ever studied ecology or environmental sciences is perhaps familiar with an author by the name of Garrett Hardin. And Garrett Hardin in the late 60s wrote an essay called The Tragedy of the Commons, and it was about this very thing. When you have something that doesn't, like I say, drive revenue, doesn't drive profitability, doesn't save money, it tends to get ignored. If something belongs to everybody in a society organized like ours, it tends to belong to no one. So it's chronically underfunded, and it's kind of left to go fallow. The real issue or problem that we have is that because technology innovation, I think at least, is now being driven primarily out of the consumer space, government organizations that deploy technology and that are funded out of the public till have had to scramble to try to keep up, right? So the issue, it's really intertwined, though we've broken it down in this particular presentation into these different buckets, unless you consider the technology rollout along with sufficient funding, unless you consider the technology rollout along the lines of what Barb mentioned in terms of operations and the people who can run it and the people who have the institutional knowledge from yesterday but can be adapted to the technology today, that's what keeps us from happening. So there are challenges, and it's important that people realize that when we talk about things like indoor location, but I would submit that the primary challenge or the primary blocks are some of these systemic issues and not just technology.
Okay.
Just some quick hits on technology. One, I think, and Barbara described it perfectly, we need to shift from significant variation PSAP by PSAP, but variation which isn't constructive variation because it's variation around doing the same function, to a mindset that has an enterprise approach, at least at a statewide level, that has variation, not needless variation, but employs variation in a strategic way to achieve the kind of resiliency that you want through diverse networks, but not just physically diverse, but you want logical diversity. You probably also want vendor diversity and provider diversity, so that I used to say in DoD, if we're going to put all our eggs in the IP basket, we better build a pretty good basket. We've got to build a pretty good basket in 911 as we converge so many things around IP. So the technology challenge in that, to me, is an orchestration challenge, and I don't think that all of the study that needs to go into how to effectively do orchestration of so many different new kinds of functions we expect to have our PSAPs engage in, our emergency response operations centers. I believe that academic time would be well spent on orchestration. Second quick hit on technology, GIS, Geospatial Information Systems. These will become more and more important as location improves. Locations improve indoors. How do we ensure that the seams around where the maps end don't wind up killing people? So we've got to, I think, commit to treating GIS not as, hey, I got the street center line data, I'm okay, to something that professionally approaches filling in the gaps and sustaining the accuracy of three-dimensional GIS. That means including all the floors of the building and rooms within the building. And the final area of technology challenge that I'd like to add is cybersecurity. And the cybersecurity challenge is such that if we try to tackle this PSAP by PSAP by PSAP across the 6,000 plus PSAPs in the nation, we will never be able to afford to next generation 911 and do this effectively. We've got to think about a new approach to how we address the cybersecurity challenge that ensures that we've got the right experts efficiently applied in the right nodes without not also recognizing that while I have some cybersecurity experts that are supporting an entire state's worth of systems, that I also have every PSAP, every element that Next Gen 911 touches, knows they have a hygiene responsibility and is appropriately addressing cybersecurity hygiene. I was at an event a week ago. The National Governors Association had a 2-day cybersecurity conference with the governor's cybersecurity committee, and I had a panel where there were at least 10 CIOs from states that shall remain nameless. And I asked the state CIOs, okay, who is responsible for cybersecurity of 911 in their state? Not one of the CIOs knew or was able to even offer an informed opinion of who should be responsible for cybersecurity for their state. Yet the CIOs came to a conference about cybersecurity and risk in their state, and they don't see 911 in their sites as their responsibility. They see the governor's land, they see protecting voting, they see any number of IT-enabled systems. But because 911 it's been such a stovepipe that state leadership really hasn't pinned the rose on, okay, who's the accountable risk officer for introducing technology, the right technological approach to ensure that these new systems don't have unacceptable risk.
Great. And so, of course, the technical challenges include the design and operational issues. And I think that the orchestration question, I think we should basically understand that people should now speak to what is driving and motivating them. And these topics that I have shown up on the board, I don't mean to go round in circles and hit one after the other. And I'm sorry if I implied that. Basically, I know everybody at this table has expertise in multiple layers of this, and whatever you talk about at this point, you're going to hit on one or the other of those. So let me recede. We're starting to develop our own synergy here. So I'm going to back further and further in here and let you talk amongst yourselves, and I will talk amongst you too as so the spirit moves me. So who wants to go? I think that
I'd like to pick up on something Barb indicated, because when we first started the task force on optimization of PSAP architectures, the public safety community, all the PSAP directors around the country, read optimization as code for consolidation. Oh, you're going to shut down my PSAP. And that, I think, is exactly the wrong way to look at this. And that as we think about the history of 911, why do we have 6,000 PSAPs? It was a very efficient way of approaching the 911 challenge, knowing that the business end of 911 is the dispatchable resources. And the dispatchable resources are rationalized around local jurisdictions. Counties determine how many fire trucks they're going to have. Cities determine whether they're going to have a full period police force or whether they're going to have 8 hours a day and a reserve force in the evening, if it's a rural location. So the 911 PSAPs were really organized to best serve the connection between the citizens and those dispatchable resources. Well, that limitation in the dispatchable resources doesn't magically go away just because technologically we figured out how to connect this all by IP and develop an ESINet. And instead of looking at this as an opportunity to go to fewer physical PSAPs, I think instead looking at this as I want to reduce the technical variation across the state and really have one ESINet, and I would say two ESINets, right? I want a diverse transport layer for my ESINet, and I kind of want two loops that join as few nodes as possible, and have a cloud approach to that where I'm bringing platform capabilities into a number of PSAPs. Some of my best employees at the FCC are full period telecommunicators. I never see them, or rarely see them. There's no reason why we can't take those small PSAPs and have them become a fully integrated part of a statewide PSAP approach, that they just happen to be in a different room, but they've got all of the capabilities that they're drawing from that cloud-based platform that any of the larger PSAPs would have. So I think that's definitely a design and operational issue that ought to be thought, that let's not throw out that local connection of what made 911 so effective across the country just because we've figured out IP works.
So,
Another part of this, I mean,
sorry.
and Barbara brought this up, was resiliency and redundancy. Quite frankly, I am sick and tired of reading about a single fiber cut taking down a PSAP or a state for extended hours. I thought fibers were rings. And unless I got two backhoes digging at the same time, why do I go down? To me, that is an architectural flaw in the implementation of that network. Somebody didn't do their job.
Yep. And I would just want to follow up on that is, if one conceptual mistake that I think we made in the NG911 architecture is the concept of an ESI net. Namely that it conflates really two different pieces. It made sense at the time because that's kind of when that started 15 years ago, but it has come to mean that this is a physical network, fibers, that is separated for 911. And in many cases, that leads exactly to the kind of, because I can only afford one dedicated fiber for 911, I'm only get one dedicated fiber. Most locations, unless they're in extremely rural areas, have theoretically and at reasonable cost points access to anywhere between 5 and 7 IP connectivity solutions. They can get a local DSL provider, typically the ILEC or CLEC. They can get a business data service type of provider, cable company, for example. They can probably, if in a somewhat larger location, get one of the data center focused guys, level 3s and Cogents of the world and Zaos and so on. They can get satellite. They can get 4G. They can get a point-to-point link to another nearby location, either by point-to-point wireless or point-to-point optical at reasonable cost, $10,000 type of cost. They just have to
HFLE. I wanted to say HF, okay?
HF if they have to, but you can enumerate even in, again, most PSAPs are not in kind of random rural locations. They're typically in county seats. In almost all of those locations, except for most rural ones, they have access to multiple ones, and the most rural ones are typically very small, and so we can tolerate temporary failures as long as the failover works to a better resource location. So the notion that we need to build fiber networks or even lease fiber networks to create ESI nets, I think has dramatically slowed down the deployment of NG911 because it now means you have to get a bunch of PSAPs together that may not be ready at the same time for any number of reasons, budget, personalities, people's retirement projections, namely, I'm retiring in a year or two. Do I really want to deal with an NG transition at this point? Nobody's willing to say that, but I think that is happening quite a bit, given the age structure that we have at many PSAP directors. So moving in a model that is now a more cloud-based model, private cloud, public cloud, I don't care, where each PSAP uses as much of a publicly available IP-based infrastructure and does virtual overlays if they really need to, and then has shared IT resources, servers, whatever, all the NG component, but gets away from the notion that we have to build 6,000 or 3,000, if you look at the number of counties, ESI nets. We're never going to get that done. Many states have IP networks already. They have fiber networks, and tying into those makes a whole lot more sense in addition to using commercially available backup functionality. No, it's not 5 nines. No, it doesn't have SLAs, but it works as a backup. It's unlikely to have the same failure modes. than your primary connectivity has. So moving away from that, I have to have my own network model. Operationally, I think, is probably the single thing that we can do, and the notion I have to have my own server room that I can show off to visitors is probably the second thing that I would say from an operational perspective would greatly accelerate the let's do this one area at a time 3,000 times over.
I think Barbara might have experience that you wanted to talk
Can I
about
make
in this
just
area.
one point, and you can turn it over because I think this is worthwhile given what
Yeah,
Henning just
yeah.
said. And as one of the people in the room, I'm sure there's others who were present at the creation when Nina started i3 so many, many years ago. The situation that Henning just described was exactly the concept that we had in mind when we started putting the whole concept together. This morphing into the need for a separate network of deploying fiber, trenching, whatever it is that you're doing, having to have this separate physical infrastructure was completely against the entire concept, right? It destroyed the economics, it slowed down the deployment, and I won't say who, I certainly have my strong feelings as to who, diverted the path, but this was the original intention of ESINets. It was to use infrastructure that already existed as much as possible. It was always a logical concept. It was never a physical one. Somebody hijacked it along the way and turned it into a physical one, and that definitely has slowed us down, right? So I wanted to get that on the record.
I think we have to look at the other end of that as well, and that is the access into this network. Even where we have seen a lot of deployment, and I should say there are states that have done a really good job, we are hampered on the front end for the very same reasons. Our access network, to try to get direct connectivity into that network from carriers of all different stripes and levels, especially if those two data centers are in diverse locations, has really been a huge undertaking. Now, I can't say that I haven't gotten it done with some people, but it is rare, and it is the real shame of next generation 911 networks is that we have beautiful IP networks all sitting there behind single points of failure, and there's still times where we have as many as 3 selective routers daisy-chained into that network. And I'm telling you, it's not acceptable, but it passes muster because the access side carriers really enforce that it's okay back with the commissions, and the commission says they've been historically doing it that way. It must be okay. Now, eventually, they'll be ready to go connect direct, but the ones that are owning those selective routers definitely are saying, but we'll only connect ours, and you got to go out and get all the rest of these folks to connect. Well, identifying who the rest of these folks are, getting them all on the same page with you, and bringing them into the fold is a hard job to do one at a time. Now, I can't say I haven't tried it, and I've done it in some cases, and I'm doing it right now. I'm just telling you, it's a barrier, and it's definitely an opportunity somehow to get the carrier community, whether they fund events or go to them or speak at very high levels, the actions don't speak as loudly as the words. And I'm telling you, the words are just, yes, we're going to do this, but getting them to really connect diversely into that network is not it's almost a near miracle right now. And that means they have to find a way. They have multiple ways. Just as we have multiple ways to get to PSAPs, they don't have to put in trenched fiber over to these data centers. They can get there a number of ways. We would prefer it to be diverse because for their customers, I like to tell the ones that have done it, when you're there and you're diverse, you have an advantage over the carrier you're competing with in your marketplace because you actually have true end-to-end diversity. The rest of them, then somebody has to pick up their cell phone if their wireline phone didn't go through. They have to do something else. And now I'm finding out, even with the VoIP carriers, we had a lot of CLECs. And the VoIP carriers are aggregators, as you know, and a lot of the VoIP calls aren't as many as you would think. But now the CLECs, because they're finding budgets are inconvenient to pay. Say I have a single switch and I'm a CLEC and I cover half the state with that switch. I got to pay for 2 trunks minimum into every selective router, even if I only have one trunk group coming over to the selective router for everybody in the networks. So I might need 36 trunks to pay for when I only need really 6 trunks worth of traffic. And I ought to put them on T1s, but obviously into the selective routers, they don't have to do that. But when they come to the data centers, they do. So I know I'm talking out of school maybe, but I'm saying this is the problem of not getting this implemented is access carrier connectivity too.
You're
So
right
we
in
had-
school.
I'd like to just follow up on that from a policy perspective, because what you've described, I think, is a barrier that absolutely exists today, because you've described the demarcation between the FCC's authorities and the state's authorities, and or in some states what they've ceded to local communities, and the states and the local communities have an increasingly weak hand to play in this regard with regard to the providers, and in the design of next generation 911. The EZNets is not something the FCC has any authority to define or require anything, even though the EZNet in reality will be a contract with a communication service provider, either MPLS or VPN or both. And I would love for the group, the community, to think about how we would reduce the barriers from a policy perspective, to change the incentive structure so we weren't strongly incenting the perpetuation of camatrunks and selective routers, that by policy we could create the right carrots that would say, hey, look, no, we want to have those things be retired as rapidly as possible, and this is what that looks like. I don't think we've got the right policy incentives in place, and we could definitely use help in determining by policy how to reduce those barriers.
And I will jump in because I have to leave in 1 minute for here. So one of the things that we had, and this was well before my time at the FCC, is we had similar problems in the early days of mobile. Namely, what's the demarcation line between the carrier responsibility and the PSAP responsibility? This led to the King County ruling, and which led to at least a somewhat more clarity as to where does one responsibility end and the next ones begin. I suspect at some point we need to have a much broader conversation as to what is appropriate for that. And one of the problems, and this is going to hurt on both sides, is that if you look at interconnection that's taking place for voice and for CDNs, Netflix and all of that, they're not interconnecting at every ladder. Ladders don't make a whole lot of sense for CDNs. They're connecting in 8 or 12 places in the United States. Not 50, not 3,000, not anything close to that. It's usually 8 or 12, the usual suspects. Namely, think Virginia, think LA, San Jose, the usual well-connected, where all the fiber is going, where all the neutral colocation facilities are in that. I suspect, if I were to predict, if we want to make progress, it has to be that PSAPs have to get out of the notion that, oh, I have to pay for transport to, I'm in Oregon, I have to pay for transport to San Jose. No, wrong model. You have an IP trunk, they don't charge by the mile anymore. And
to think about that, I don't think the PSAPs are the ones that should have to figure that out. I think the carriers really have that obligation, and they have not stepped up to design that IXP orientation for Next Gen 911.
And that boils back down to what you had said earlier. You've got old school people who are looking. They don't want to get involved in this. They want to retire. They want to move on. You've got the political boundaries that everybody's got a dollar here, a dollar there, and those dollars aren't being allocated in the proper locations. And you're not thinking. It's the broader policy, like you said. We probably could consolidate a lot of this into larger centers that are able to support a larger geographical area, but you do run into the political and the cash boundaries. Who's in charge of this? Who wants to be in charge of this city? Who wants to be in charge of this county? Who wants to pay for this and pay for that? We've got to get beyond, the political and, try to and consolidate some of the financial requirements and work together as well.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I've heard from Barbara over the year or years that we've communicated, is that without the policy, nobody, it's who's going to pay for it is really decisive.
The technology is there. The technology
It's whose
is
responsibility
here.
is
Who's going
this?
to be responsible and who's willing to take the hit if something, in that process.
Mhm.
Someone has to take the responsibility, but the technology exists. We just have to get that policy in place and then have the funds, spent in the appropriate places to get it done properly.
Just one comment, which is that if you look at the aggregate money that could be spent here, at the aggregate
It's on.
funds for all of the things you've been talking about buying, that number is a check probably so large that I assure you it will get the attention of anybody who you want to get the attention of. In fact, I've gotten the attention of CEOs of large carriers with much less money than this. Is there, and I know that at the state and local level they're very sensitive to the FCC and the federal government telling them what to do, whatever, but is there any role for some kind of, maybe, you could think of it as a Costco for PSAPs, where they're just giving you deals on, the weather strips or whatever, and kind of aggregating all that buying power in a way that maybe is a little bit more effective?
Let me maybe set the table for some of the roles and responsibilities with financing 911. There's an element of financing 911 which is clearly the providers themselves, and the FCC creates those obligations by rule, mostly associated with the consumer endpoint, the phone or data device, presented to a demarcation that represents the PSAP. And we create the obligations, and the carriers figure out how to invest to make that happen. Then there's the part of 911 which is really PSAP in the EZNet environment, EZNet in that demarcation in an EZNet world. You think about it as you're contracting MPLS or contracting VPN. That's this relatively amorphous boundary that isn't necessarily co-located physically anymore in the PSAP, like CPE used to be. There, the states have provenance, and the states, by statute, develop the fees for how they're going to fund 911. In most cases, the states vote on a fee based on actual use and is added to consumer bills for 911. But there's at least one state, Nevada, that says, hey, most of my 911 use is all these tourists coming in. They resource 911 in a big way through temporary occupancy tax, the TOT. The bottom line is the states that determine where the spend is going to come from on the part of Next Gen 911 that's missing now. And I think you're right in that some states have really put a lot of thought into this and are pretty far along down this path. Washington State's pretty proud right now. They're entering into their second generation of contract for EZNet 2, and they just awarded that to Comtech TCS last week. And that's a statewide EZNet in its second generation. But there are states that haven't even begun yet to bring IP into a single PSAP. When we developed the Task Force on Optimizing PSAP Architectures, we sought to develop, at least from an architecture standpoint, the cost co of, look, you don't need to put a whole lot of new thought into this. We've got a couple of models of how you would implement an EZNet and bring those next-gen 911 capabilities. But at the end of the day, it's up to the states themselves to determine which of the models, statewide, a couple of regions in the state, and how they're going to match the fees they collect for 911 and connect those to the investment required to achieve the results.
So earlier, I mean, just maybe in support of that, it's worth mentioning, right? I mean, the idea that Henning talked about is eminently applicable to our space, right? That's how everyone else does things. And he's right. If you get into a PSAP environment, there are people who will still look at that, even if they're buying IP service, and they'll think about it in a traditional telco mentality, and they're worried about per mile trunk charges, which don't exist anymore, right? So that peering point model that, well, some of us that were in the pioneering days of the global internet in the 90s, you're very familiar with it. I think all the panelists are. We solved some of those problems for IP networks 15, 20 years ago with the global peering point network that exists. There's no reason that you couldn't put something like that in place. I mean, how you apportion, who pays for it, who's responsible for bringing Network A and PSAP Region B together, that's a tough thing that involves federal and state interplay. But to the extent that you think, right, if the carriers are the ones who should be implementing something like that to replace the traditional selective router implementation, which I know is not a federal thing, it's something that came out of the states. But if, to the extent that the FCC, for example, has authority over common carriers in the 911 space, it's an idea worth thinking about.
Yeah, let me push back, because I am quite confident that the carriers today are ready to bring the transport side of that to wherever you create the demarc. I think this is 100% state and within. It's the states that are sustaining the selective router requirements and the camera trunk requirements and hanging on to that legacy architecture.
Right. That was my assumption, right?
The
Yeah, that there was
states need to come together and figure out their path to wean themselves from that legacy architecture. And the time to do that is now, because FirstNet,
couldn't agree more.
If you haven't figured that out by the time FirstNet comes to town, FirstNet will come in with one architecture for the entire country.
Yep.
And the state will have to pay for the fact they've got 36 different PSAP architectures, and they'll have to reconcile that variation with regard to a single FirstNet.
Right.
If you get your act together, states, and come up with what your ESINets look like before FirstNet comes to your town, then FirstNet will have to adapt to your next-gen 911 deployment. And it will be on them on how to integrate.
Rather than the other way around, I get it.
FirstNet with $7 billion of CapEx.
Right.
And Next Gen 911 with Congress gave $115 million.
That's still not there, right? Yeah.
We have another comment from the audience or a question.
Getting away a little bit from the access side, it's interesting because if you have a PSAP or the new acronym that you talked about earlier.
The EROC.
The EROC.
EROC.
There you go. Somebody write that down.
Most of the time they're cash strapped.
Yes.
And while they may buy access from the service provider because they don't have any other way to get access, they may choose to download an open source SIP server and run that. And you can imagine how easily it would be to bring, some SIP server, open source SIP servers down. In fact, we have a broad class of attacks where I can even bring Camellia down, reduce it by almost 80%. So are we going to get in the position where we have kind of what Henning said, an underwriter's laboratory that at least says that for PSAPs or for public safety, we need to have some minimum adherence from the SIP servers, from the servers that you use, such that attacks, not completely preventable, should be made at least harder.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that needs to happen. In the Task Force on Optimizing PSAP Architecture, the cybersecurity group defined a organizational construct that they termed EC3, the ESINet cybersecurity, emergency communications cybersecurity
Emergency
Center.
Cybersecurity Communications Center.
Yeah, Emergency Communications Cybersecurity Center, EC3. And essentially, that's a security operations center for a number of PSAPs. Really, an EC3 should support a statewide ESINET or half a state ESINET or regional ESINET. Yeah, but different from a NOC that might support 24/7 operations for a particular PSAP, the efficient way to do security is on a larger scale, because you really want to do information sharing between all of the PSAPs and have experts in the analysis part. So that's the organizational architecture, I think. But the very next step then is defining how do you bring discipline into the IT implementations of the ESINET so that you're reducing variation, you're studying ahead of time, what do I want to lock down, how do I create the right hygiene associated with never implementing any device that has a default password in it, always loading drivers in a manner that's not connected to the internet, building those security hygiene processes. I think if we expect 6,000 PSAPs to all get smart on how to do that well, it's a fool's errand. That's why I'm trying to get the state CIOs to recognize this should fit into their job jar, because they're doing this by and large for important networks that the state's responsible for, and they have the capacity to organize around this in a way where, as the states deploy their ESINETs, as the states create these EC3s, or combine the EC3s with whatever the CIOs are doing with regard to their SOCs, they can build the UL for the component pieces of the ESINETs, and in doing that for the state, smart states will say, let's do this with a couple of states and divide up that UL load.
One of the challenges I see is just like you have the LATA boundaries today that create barriers. We can erase some of those and talk about statewide ESINETs, but now we've got 50 state barriers. So I live in northwestern New Jersey. It's called the tri-state area. There are 3 states that come together at one point. So not only do I need to interoperate within my state, someplace in my state I've got state-to-state interoperability. And I can erase the challenge on one side, but I've still got New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania that all have to play nice.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. So the interoperability needs to be sustained across state boundaries. The reason why I think, though, that the states are the responsible entities for creating security in the ESINETs is they're the ones who have the ability to raise the funds, right? So you've got to manage how much of this you're going to bite off with the burden that you're going to place on taxpayers, so that you don't get so far out ahead of the functionality that you're building in that you're not able to afford that functionality that you just bought, or not able to afford the security for that functionality. So I think the right planning unit is the state, because they're the ones that can determine. In the Northeast, it's about $1.25 every month per bill. In Arizona, it's 17 cents per month per bill. Arizona is going to have a different approach than they're having in Connecticut and Massachusetts.
Well, and also it's the diversion of those funds as well. We know that there's billions of dollars that are, being diverted away from the stated purpose of 911 that are now, to meet somebody's political agenda.
But those are state choices. Those are state choices. And who can throw those bums out? The state citizens.
The state. So, yeah, right.
We have a question from the back, a comment.
When Barb, especially when we talk about design, operational, finance, policy, all the issues and the barriers to those issues, these are some of the same issues that we all experienced back in the centralized world of E911. Those same barriers exist in the deployment of the ESINET environment as well, whether it be redundancy, equipment redundancy, or fiber diversity, or those are the same issues, and the costs associated with those issues. So back to the point of who is mandating the requirements, and they're on a state-by-state basis rather than at a federal level, I guess what you're saying is that they're on a state-by-state basis. So what criteria is being established to ensure that those requirements are met, whether it be diversity of fiber or whether it be failover for duplex environment for the ESINets? Who's establishing that criteria?
All right, I want to say that we've now run over. I was allowing about another 5 minutes to wrap since we did start a bit late. So what I'd like you to do is wrap on that one. I want to raise one, sort of let everybody have a word or two in, and then we'll have to close it. So you'll have your time.
Yeah, this'll be it, since I'm obviously going to go up next, and maybe I can clean some things up in that final presentation. But for what it's worth, right, there is NINA documentation on what best practices for building an ESINet are, right? So they're there, right? The issue, obviously, with NINA is it's always been de facto and industry best practice. It's never been de jure ever imposed on someone, but it's there, and people, by and large, have tried to follow it because it's been developed by industry. And then the only other thing I'll say is if I had a nickel or even a dollar for every time somebody talked about certification authorities, and I've had to write, I don't know, umpteen thousand white papers at NINA about this because it comes up every 6 months, the idea of a UL laboratory for certification for Next Gen 911, however noble and needed, it runs exactly into what Admiral Simpson talked about, right? With 50 states and 50 jurisdictions, 50 funding mechanisms, which means 50 hands in every pot. It's just more difficult. It's more easily said than done. However necessary, somebody could probably make a full-time career out of figuring out how we do that in the next couple of years.
Okay, if we're going to wrap. I was intrigued by what Henning said. I was sorry you couldn't talk about the CDN model. If anybody wants to just talk to that or just say a final word, we have to, yeah.
Yeah, I could. I'd like to also tie it into
Okay.
the last question, because I think what you manage to is availability, right? And you keep, what I would do in DOD for UAV operations in Afghanistan, for controllers that are sitting with joysticks in Las Vegas, Nevada, at Creech Air Force Base, my marching orders were 5 9s. And I managed to 5 9s. And if I started to not get an availability of 5 9s and started to creep down to 4 9s, I added an additional element of diversity. And I kept adding diversity until I got back to 5 9s. So I think the same kind of approach as you manage your ESINets should be, you've got to really get into performance monitoring and set the status of what you expect your SLAs to be, and know what you're going to get from individual SLAs and what you're going to get by creating additional SLAs. Instead of throwing more money after bad with a single provider that at best is going to give you 3 9s, add in another provider, a competitor, which is going to get you to the 5 9s that you want to be at. And to Henning's point on the SDNs and the IXPs, I think what he's really referring to is think about next gen as we move forward, more about cloud fabric, right? You never want to have a single database and a single server. You really want to take advantage of virtual machines, and you want to distribute many instances of those virtual machines across a cloud fabric. That, boy, if you've got a data center today, don't shut it down. Make it part of your cloud fabric. And add a couple of VMs in there. You're only going to manage the VMs from one location, but you're going to have them physically distributed across a cloud fabric. And then you've got to bring in the concept of load balancing. That's something that the 911 environment today just doesn't seem to understand and have that concept. You don't want to have failover. You want to be hot all the time. You want to load balance both the calls, but also the calling infrastructure around those VMs such that statistically any call is going to go to a different VM every time. And if a couple of VMs fails because you lost power in one of your data centers, who cares?
It happens all the time. And in fact, that's what we did with engineering rules for load balance and for diversity, and set the SLAs for the number of 9s we expect on the ESINet as well as to the PSAP, which can be lower level if you've got a failover that goes to someplace that is diverse completely. And that's what we look for. We don't even declare that we're going to use somebody as a backup. But when you got a great big center that doesn't have enough backup, you can't fail over onto 10 little centers and kill them either. So you do have the reality of the network you're dealing with when you're trying to build it. And you're right, you can just keep looking for more players. But the amount of money you have available is usually set from those clients.
Okay.
So let's virtualize CPE, let's virtualize CAD, and take advantage of a broader fabric, not just transport, but storage than we currently have. Storage and CPU, yeah.
Okay, well,
in
Fletch
every one
is-
of those conversations, you know, and you just said it again, the finances. You know, somebody's going to say, how much is this going to cost me? Where am I going to get the funds from? The funds are available, but they're being diverted into areas that they weren't intended to be diverted from. We have to bring awareness to the public that, you know, the funds that you thought were going here are not going here. They're going here to build that nice new park that makes, you know, this guy look good over here. It has to be managed and controlled.
Okay. On that note, I think Fletch should be trying to pull us off of this podium so that Bill can
And I'll go
step
quick,
up,
right?
too.
There's really nothing that I have to say that hasn't been said all day.
You
It'll
want to
just be
keep the
more
panel
of-
up for the other half hour?
Well, I would like a few minutes to do the summing up because I think it's valuable.
Yeah, yeah.
But if I got 15, 20 minutes, I think I'm fine. I
Well,
think
if people want to continue this, and then you take maybe 15, 20 minutes at the end, I mean,
except
I don't
the
want
only
to
thing I'm
cut.
worried about is everybody bolting at 5:30.
Yeah, all right, all
I
right.
would like to be able to finish up by 5:30 like we
All right,
promised.
well, in
So-
that
See,
case,
we already
why
got
don't
one,
we,
so no offense to call you out. But
you call it.
I think we've accomplished.
I think so. I
I-
think this has been a great panel.
This was
and
a very last-minute
unfortunately
ad
was-
hoc,
yeah.
and
Well, we had
Admiral
the
Simpson,
resource.
thank you
We
very
had the
much.
resources here. I think we made a good start. I'd almost like to just keep this going somehow and communicate email wise, and see what other information we can get. But I think we should now give Bill his.
And you know what, I mean, quite
And
frankly, if the
thanks,
panel
everybody.
wants to stay, I mean, I just want to make a few summing up remarks. The people have my presentation, you're going to distribute them, correct?
Well, we'll show them. They're
Yeah,
up
yeah,
here.
but I'm saying at the
Yeah.
end, people will have it, because there's no way
Yeah.
I'll go through all the charts. But I mean, seriously, if there's comments that people want to make while they're up here, I mean, I got no problems with that. It's, the topic you picked for me luckily ends up being pretty much a summing up. There's really nothing that I can duplicate that this group of people hasn't already said. So, if nothing else, it'll just be an emphasis of lessons learned from the day and takeaways that people can take home with them, so.
This guy right here.
I think we set the bar very high for next year.
I'm gonna stick
Thanks.
around.
Thanks.